What if a single painting on your wall was quietly outperforming your entire stock portfolio? Collecting original art isn't just about taste. It delivers personal enrichment, aesthetic pleasure, financial return, and cultural preservation, all from one object on a wall. That combination doesn't exist anywhere else. Here's a term worth knowing: illiquid asset. Unlike stocks you can sell in seconds, a painting worth $100 million can't be converted to cash overnight. That friction is deliberate, and it shapes every strategy around art collecting. Humans have collected art for centuries, and the motivations have never been purely aesthetic. Rulers used collections as propaganda. Aristocrats used them for prestige. Enlightenment thinkers used them for intellectual credibility. The impulse is ancient and always strategic. Here's where the numbers get genuinely staggering. Estimates place the total value of art and collectibles transferring between generations over the next decade at $1 trillion. $1 trillion. That's not a niche hobby, that's a parallel economy. Drill down further, and it gets sharper. Roughly $100 billion in art and collectible assets could change hands every single year across that same decade. Most personal finance coverage fixates on equities and real estate. Art transfers at this scale rarely surface in mainstream financial reporting, which is why the figure catches even informed investors off guard. Economists call this intergenerational wealth transfer, assets moving from one generation to the next. Art sits at the center of that transfer because it holds value across time in ways cash deposits don't. It survives inflation, trend cycles, and market crashes. Stop. Because this is where a stubborn misconception needs to die. Most people believe art collecting is exclusively for the wealthy. It isn't. Emerging artists, local galleries, and online platforms have opened the market to buyers at almost every income level. The Arts Council of England has documented this extensively. Arts and culture deliver measurable economic, health, societal, and educational benefits to communities. When more people collect, more people benefit. The gallery isn't a velvet rope club. It's a public good in disguise. But here's where it gets genuinely complicated. Art's value is highly subjective. One collector sees a canvas worth $5 million. Another sees overpriced paint. That subjectivity is simultaneously art's greatest financial strength and its most frustrating limitation. Subjective value means no algorithm can price art cleanly. That inefficiency terrifies finance professionals, but it thrills savvy collectors. Buying before consensus forms is exactly how generational fortunes in art get built. The uncertainty is the opportunity. So, how does consensus form? One of the most reliable mechanisms is institutional validation. When a major museum features a specific artist, that artist's work reliably gains market value. The institution broadcasts legitimacy to the broader market all at once. Think about it this way. A museum retrospective is a scarcity signal broadcast to millions of people simultaneously. It says this artist's work matters, and there's only so much of it. Demand spikes while supply stays fixed. That's a textbook recipe for price appreciation. But let's not romanticize this. Art has always been a tool of power. Louis XIV filled Versailles with over 6,000 paintings and sculptures, specifically to project royal authority and define French cultural supremacy. The aesthetic and the political have never been separate. Versailles was as much a propaganda machine as a palace. Today's collectors aren't so different. A carefully curated private collection signals taste, intellect, and cultural authority. It's personal branding executed in oil paint and bronze. The prestige function that once served kings now serves anyone willing to invest the attention and capital. Here's an insight that reframes the entire conversation. Art collections aren't just private wealth, they're potential societal wealth. When collectors donate, lend, or open collections to the public, the cultural value multiplies far beyond what any auction price could capture. Cultural preservation isn't a vague phrase, it's a literal function. When J.P. Morgan acquired thousands of manuscripts, drawings, and rare books in the early 20th century and opened them to scholars, he rescued works that would otherwise have been dispersed or lost entirely. Without collectors willing to pay and protect, entire chapters of human creative history vanish from the record. Here's the hard question every collector eventually faces. What happens when you actually need the money? Because art isn't a liquid asset, selling quickly almost always means selling at a discount. The same friction that protects long-term value can trap short-term cash flow. Sophisticated collectors treat art as a long-horizon position, not a savings account. They hold diversified portfolios where art complements liquid assets rather than replacing them. The $100 million collection is a financial strategy, not a decoration budget. Patience is the entire business model. Here's the actual mechanism driving all of this. Art holds value because communities collectively agree it does. That agreement gets reinforced by institutions, critics, auction records, and cultural memory. Remove any one of those pillars and the value wobbles. Together, they're remarkably durable. Recall that subjective value problem. The subjectivity isn't a flaw in the system, it is the system. Disagreement about value is precisely what creates the market. No disagreement means no transactions, no price discovery, and no opportunity for the informed collector. Art collecting doesn't exist in isolation. It feeds an entire ecosystem. Galleries, restorers, insurers, art advisors, auction houses, and shippers all depend on active collectors. The Arts Council of England's research confirms that arts investment generates measurable downstream economic activity in every community it touches. Consider a working example. An emerging painter sells modestly at local fairs. A mid-tier gallery picks up the work. A regional museum includes it in a group exhibition. Suddenly, the same canvases that sold for $800 are fielding offers at $12,000. Institutional attention compounded the value. But here's the uncomfortable question lurking beneath all of this. What if the institutions get it wrong? In 1863, the Paris Salon rejected so many Impressionist works that the French government created a separate exhibition, the Salon des Refusés, just to display them. Critics mocked the paintings. Decades later, those same canvases became the most celebrated works in Western art history. Institutional validation is powerful, but it isn't infallible. The collector who sees ahead of consensus wins biggest and loses hardest. Experienced collectors reduce that risk through deep research, relationships with working artists, and attention to critical discourse before it reaches mainstream outlets. The edge isn't luck, it's information gathered earlier than everyone else. That's true in every asset class, and art is no exception. Zoom out and something comes into focus. Collecting art isn't passive consumption, it's active cultural participation. Every purchase funds a living artist and preserves a creative practice. The Medici family's systematic patronage of Florentine painters and sculptors in the 15th century directly funded the Renaissance. Their purchasing decisions shaped an entire civilization's visual culture for centuries. Return to that $1 trillion intergenerational transfer figure. The generation inheriting those collections will decide what gets donated, sold, or locked away. Those choices will determine which cultural voices survive and which disappear. That's not hyperbole. That's the documented stakes. For anyone who dismissed this as irrelevant to their own finances, accessible collecting is real. Buying a single work by an emerging local artist for $200 is a legitimate entry point. The market scales from there. The idea that this world requires inherited wealth is simply false. The benefits aren't only financial. Research from the Arts Council of England confirms that regular engagement with arts and culture correlates with measurable improvements in mental health, social cohesion, and educational outcomes. Collecting puts you inside that ecosystem, not observing it from the outside. Here's the system-level insight. Art collecting is a category of wealth building where cultural intelligence compounds alongside financial returns. Cultural intelligence here means concrete, practical knowledge, tracking an artist's exhibition history, monitoring critical reception in specialist journals, identifying which institutions are beginning to show interest before prices reflect it. The collector who combines that knowledge with market awareness is playing a game most purely financial investors can't enter. Remember that question at the very start, the painting quietly outperforming your stock portfolio? That's not a fantasy. It's the documented reality for collectors who understood that art is simultaneously an illiquid asset, a cultural artifact, and a long-horizon bet on human attention. All three at once. The next time you walk past a gallery, you're not looking at decoration. You're looking at the intersection of culture, capital, and collective human belief. Walk in, ask the price. The market starts wherever you do.